So this week we're talking about data, supply chain data, and particularly inventory data, and how if you don't have accurate inventory data, you can really be up the creek without a paddle, and it can cost you millions in your organization. So I'm going to go through three case studies from different organizations that we've worked with over the years, the challenges that they faced, how they overcame them, and you'll see for yourself how potentially they avoided millions of dollars of wasted cash. So let's get right into it. Before I start with the first case study, I must apologize for the environment here. I'm in our Bangkok office this week, so I'm not in my studio, so hopefully the video and the sound is okay. So first case study, and this was in the mining resources sector. You could also think of it as MRO, maintenance, repair and operations type organization. So we're not talking FMCG here. We're talking big stuff. We're talking about capital equipment, the size of double-decker buses down to little items, spares the size of washers. So I'm sure you can sort of imagine the type of operation that we're talking about. Think, I have to kind of disguise these case studies a little bit, but think of a big mining company and all the sort of excavation equipment they've got and so on, and processing equipment. So these people had this massive organization moving millions of tons of product with all of these spare parts, and they were running out of space and they needed to build a new warehouse on the site. Plus, they were thinking about taking some off-site storage with a 3PL. So we got involved in looking at their inventory and what was critical, what was, what to keep near the coal face, if you like. It wasn't coal. What to keep near the coal face, what potentially could be taken off site, and what could be disposed of. Because the last thing you want to do is to build a new warehouse and cram it full of stuff that you're never going to use. You're wasting money on the facility, making it larger than it needs to be, maybe putting in the wrong storage equipment and so on. So there was a little bit of a challenge with this, because our task was really to look at how big should this new warehouse be, and then the subsequent decision was, do we build it on site? Do we build part of it on site and some off site and so on? What we found, and we wanted to do this really sort of careful, detailed inventory analysis, what we found is data from three different sources across the organization didn't match. Like, it was totally different. In terms of inventory levels, criticality, it was a bit of a disaster. And so what that organization had to do was to then go through a process of about 5 or 6 months where they started to tidy up their inventory records, where they started going through stock checks, where they started, I mean, you can imagine this type of organization, you're going to have stuff that hasn't moved for 10 years, but you've got to keep it because it's a critical spare. So engineers have to go through all the inventory and work out what needs to be kept, what's obsolete. We've got spare parts for equipment that we no longer use, et cetera, et cetera. So that process took about 6 months. And then finally, they could actually design the new warehouse, and it could be the right size rather than, potentially double the size that they needed. So they literally saved millions on designing and constructing that new warehouse. So it's not an unusual situation. You tend not to get these issues in FMCG, fast-moving consumer goods. It's much faster turnover, higher velocity product, much more focus on the sales and making sure you got sales availability and things like that. MRO resources is a little bit different because a lot of it is just in case stuff that tends to sit there. So, but very, very typical, no, not typical, that's unfair, very common in sort of mining and resources. So that one was a little bit of a challenge that held them up for 6 months until they got the right design for the warehouse. The next one, also in resources, and an expanding operation, we'll call it a miner again. And in this case, their operations were expanding and they just needed more storage space because they were getting in more capital equipment. They had a broader range of equipment. The spares inventory was blowing out, consumables was blowing out. And they actually had a number of kind of small warehouses dotted around the key sites. And what they wanted to do was to consolidate that into a big new warehouse where they could maintain the integrity of the inventory, look after it properly. and so on, and get it undercover because a lot of it was getting damaged, being stored outside. So they were going through this exercise again of looking at how much inventory have we got? What do we really need? I mean, there was stuff with grass growing out of it. Do we really need that? Surprisingly, some of it you do. And so they'd gone through that process, but the challenge they then had was they didn't have any weights and dimensions for the products. So if you've been involved in warehouse design, you know that ideally you want all the weights, dimensions, the pack sizes, the fact that 10, oh, can't really see, the fact that 10 of those come in in inner, 10 inners go into an outer, all that kind of stuff. You need to know that because you've got to not only look at the storage capacity you need in the warehouse, but the number of picking slots, and what size, what unit is going to go into the picking slot. Will it be that individual pen? Will it be an inner of three? Will it be a carton of whatever? So you need that really detailed inventory data, and particularly the weights and dimensions, and they didn't have it. I forget how many SKUs they had, could have been 50,000. So rather than in the first case, spending 6 months trying to work all that out, they were very smart. And they were in a position where the number of suppliers wasn't huge. I think the number of core suppliers might have been 50 or 60. And so they went to their suppliers and said, hey, can you give us the weights and dimensions of all these different products? That took a bit of a time, of course, but with that information, then they could design the storage and handling solution much more accurately. So they could design how much storage space was needed, how many pallet spots, how many carton spots, how many, little bins for nuts and washers and things like that. They could get a really detailed design. I seem to recall they even looked at things like vertical lift machines, much more dense storage, particularly good for MRO type organizations. And so it enabled them to get a very precise design, if you like, for their storage and handling requirements. The result is, again, they didn't have to waste money building a facility that was too large or just as bad, too small. They built it the right size. And it was particularly important because they spent about $25 million fitting out the warehouse just with the storage and handling equipment. So you want to get it right, not only in terms of the overall capacity, but the types of storage media, the numbers of pallet spots, the number of floor storage, the number of bins of various different sizes. So they thankfully had the time where they could actually talk to their suppliers and get all of that weight and dimension data from the suppliers. So that enabled them to get a really good warehouse design. Now let's jump industries with case study number 3. And this is an industrial products company, so we're not talking about FMCG again. Sorry about that if you're into FMCG. But this was an industrial products company, and they had 3 organizations that were actually coming together. So it was an amalgamation, if you like, a merger. Very similar product ranges, and in fact, across a couple of the businesses, there was a distinct overlap of products. So if you imagine they each had 10,000 products on their range, maybe they had 300, which were actually the same product, but they had different product codes because company A had a different product code to company B, even though it's exactly the same product. So you might say, well, why does that matter? Well, it does matter because when you amalgamate all of that and you've got 30,000 products, you have to design not only the storage, but the number of pick locations that you've got. And you could perhaps be ending up with a design that's got 20,000 pick locations or 30,000 pick locations. It actually impacts the design considerably. And so they really wanted to know, how much storage capacity do we need, but also how many pick locations and what size pick locations. So again, it's coming back to how many pallet spots are we going to pick from, carton spots, bins of different sizes, shelving, and all that kind of thing. Guess what? They didn't have all the weights and dimensions either. This is very, very common. In a lot of industries, it's very common. So what did they do? They were in a bit of a rush, and they couldn't really go to all of their suppliers because they had so many suppliers all over the world, it would have taken forever. So they took a slightly different approach. And given that some of their products weren't the size of double-decker buses, what they did was to go and rent some equipment which would help them weigh and dimension all of their products. There's some very well-known products out there. It's a little bit like we use a brand name when we're talking about vacuum cleaners, don't we? I don't want to use the brand name. I'm not here to promote a particular brand. But if you imagine a supermarket checkout where you've got a little conveyor and scanners and all the rest of it, you can get pieces of equipment like that, which are about the size of a tabletop, and you can pass all of your products through this scanner, and it will weigh, it will measure all the dimensions. You can enter in how many eaches are in a pack and all that kind of stuff, and it weighs them. And so that's what this company did. They actually hired a number of those machines. They got staff in over the weekends, and I think over about a 2 month period, they scanned something like 30,000 products. Yeah, mind numbing, but so worthwhile because, again, you can imagine at the end of that, what did they get? They had a really accurate product master. They knew the exact weights and dimensions and pack sizes of all of their products, and they could precisely design their warehouse storage and location and picking. Without that, they'd be guessing. And when you're guessing, you just hope you're close. You're not going to get it as accurate. And you could end up with the wrong type of pick slots. You could miss opportunities like being able to use vertical lift machines or different storage and handling media. But with that sort of data, you get it right. So those guys, I reckon, saved a considerable amount from consolidating those three warehouses and actually being able to get that design right. They got their warehouse the right size, they got the storage and handling the right size, and again, probably saved millions into the process. So here's my question for you. How good is your master data? How good is your inventory data? Do you have all the weights and dimensions and pack sizes and things like that? You might think it's not necessary right now, but down the track, when you're trying to do an inventory study or you're having to redesign your storage and handling, or you buy another organization and you've got to build a new warehouse, that stuff becomes critical. And sometimes it all has to be done in a rush. So it's worth, maybe in a little bit of downtime, improving your data records so that you have all of that. And one of the reasons for doing that is so that you can also actually slot your warehouse. Now, I'm not going to tell you about product slotting and all the rest of it, but it's basically about positioning your products in the warehouse to make the warehouse as efficient as possible. So think of it in very simple terms. Your fast-moving products are going to be near the dispatch area. The slower moving products can be down the back, higher up, and so on. It's all about reducing travel time in the warehouse. And to do that well, you need all the weights and dimensions and the velocities of your products so that you can reslot them. I'll add a video link in the description below, and also at the end of this video on that sort of outro screen, I'll make sure that the link is there as well. So if you want to learn about product slotting, you can do that. But anyway, just a quick video this week from Bangkok. I'll be back in Sydney next week. Just a few thoughts about data, the importance of accurate data. If you've got any, I was going to say amusing or interesting data stories, do mention them down in the comments below. Have you seen, real dramas where data hasn't been accurate, or have you seen, fantastic outcomes because of good data and accurate data? Who knew data could be so exciting? Anyway, thanks for watching this week, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye for now.